Great, thank you, Balaji. That was super interesting. We have a bunch of questions on the Meerkat here already for you, but maybe starting with something a little that I think is interesting to all of us in the context of your talk. Where do you see the role of the network school in being one of these internet places, and what's next for that in your view?
So the network school is for all of you to come and hang out and meet other people of like mind. And it's like a demilitarized zone, 10,000 kilometers away from America, where we can have peace and trade, internationalism and capitalism. We have people from more than 100 countries who've come. And we take all the good parts of the West and the US, or at least we try to, but we mix in technology and peace. And the goal of it is it's a startup society that itself bootstraps startup societies. So we ourselves are basically making a template for network states. And then that is something which our members and friends and visitors and so on can use. And we also host a network state conference every year. And of course, all of you are invited. And I'm going to put up the announcement for Network State 2025 soon enough.
Awesome, exciting. So you said something a couple of years ago that really stuck with me, which is that you see a high trust community as the ultimate store of value. I wonder if you have any thoughts on how you should go about building a high trust community and how Zuitzerland might do that.
Yeah, well, obviously much easier said than done, but I'd say a few things. First is, why did I say a high trust community is the ultimate store of value? Well, a lot of people who are too into Bitcoin or too into crypto, they just really think of money as just everything. But to be very precise about it, I think Vitalik had this phrasing, there's certain things that cannot be reduced to pairwise transactions. There are public goods, right? For example, if you have $1 million in Bitcoin and you're in Syria, right? You want to just get a ticket out of there, or you want to use that money to buy peace so you can buy a walk down the street, right? But that's not trivial. You can't just click a button on Amazon and say, I want peace in Syria. That's not trivially reducible to a transaction, right? So there's some things in a very literal sense that money can't buy because it's non-trivial to turn that into a commercial transaction. Perhaps you could bribe this or that warlord or whatever, pay this or that guy to stop shooting, but which the CIA does at times. But it's not that's not something that's a trivial thing to do, right? To find the guy who's shooting it and use the money, right? So money is definitely not everything. It is instead just one piece of what a functional society is. And you can, just like the communists went in the direction of saying society is everything and the individual is nothing, you can go in the opposite direction of it, like a maximalist, and you can go to the individual is everything, society is nothing, right? So the high trust society, I mean, if one of the reasons also that people have gotten so into money in the West, it's one of the few things that they're more and more into, is the world around them, it's become unsafe. It's become, the infrastructure is bad. For them to get a mate, for them to make their way out, they have to just YOLO into crypto or whatever, right? And what you instead want is like the old school where, we weren't rich, but we were able to work together and we had a lot of trust and so on. And what does that exactly mean? So I've got a very simple diagnostic. It's a community if you can leave your laptop down and not worry about it being taken, okay? That's like the very simplest test, because a lot of people will say they'll use the word community and they basically have a Starbucks that is a visitor lounge, And for example, you can leave your laptop down in your apartment or your house and someone's not going to take it, right? You can leave it in your friend's house, you can leave it down at work. That's actually somewhere there's in your head, there's a membrane border where it's like a safe kind of thing, right? So a high trust community is something where you can leave your laptop down. That's a very useful, hard to fake, self-diagnostic of whether it's actually real or not. You can ask somebody to do that. And how do you build something like that? Well, easier said than done, but I do think it is long bonds over time. And so that's both, right? It's actually, people need to know each other. For example, an apartment complex where people don't know each other doesn't work like that. So long bonds, and then lots of bonds, and then over time, over a long period of time, they need to know each other. That's how I think about it. Let me pause there.
Awesome, thank you. Do you have any key lessons from the first 8 months of running a network school, and what are the biggest surprises so far?
Well, I would say the network. So actually, I've got a video that I want to play. Hold on, let me see if I can find this. Let's see here. maybe you guys can you play my pinned tweet?
We can give it a go. We're having a few issues today, so I can't guarantee.
Okay.
Is finally here because we're awarding $100,000 in funding for the new Network School Fellowship. And anyone from anywhere can apply. Now you might well ask, how? Well, you see, we've set up shop on an island right off the coast of Singapore in the new special economic zone. And it has an enlightened immigration policy. That means it's the perfect place to assemble a global community of tech founders and AI creators. And that's what we've done. We've set up housing, food, co-working, fitness classes, yoga, fast Wi-Fi, office pods, a state-of-the-art gym, healthy snacks, Starlink, a makerspace, a content studio, guest lectures from the most successful founders and investors in the world, nomad visas, and help with everything else you might need. And we have funding too, if you're good. So go and apply for the Network School Fellowship now at ns.com. The only connection you need is an internet connection. Global meritocracy is finally here.
All right, we just saw that video. That didn't seem to answer my question, but maybe there's a second part to the answer.
You guys watch that? Yes? Okay, yeah. So basically, I just want to show you a snapshot of what we've built up to this point. Did you guys see like all the facilities and so on and so forth?
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah. So the reason I want to show that is perhaps my single biggest, this is kind of obvious, but also less obvious to me until I did it. The network state is about real estate as much as cryptocurrency is about fiat currency, okay? And what I mean by that is, when I was at Coinbase, we had a whole team that was just fiat engineering. And they are working around the legacy banking system and doing compliance work and managing all the craziness of wire transfers. Like Coinbase pushes the legacy wire system a lot, right? It's just not meant for this level of volume. It's not the internet, right? So it's not, wires were like this infrequent thing that you did for like house purchases, and people just used cash for most of the time, right? The system was not set up for the level of volume and, just stuff for pushing through it, right? And so it turned out that you have to get pretty good. I mean, like arguably Stripe is even better at fiat than Coinbase is, but Coinbase is really, really good at fiat. It had to get very good in order to build what it built. And in the same way, just as much as cryptocurrency is about fiat currency, of course, you can do a pure crypto thing. And in fact, the goal of crypto is to do a pure crypto thing. And you can have a pure crypto exchange like Binance, for example, right? But crypto fiat, that crypto fiat bridge is where a lot of the value is. And just without that, the whole space doesn't really exist at first, right? And so in the same way, the network state's about real estate. And like actually dealing with setting up all these facilities in the physical world, and like even booting up laundry, for example. Like you might think it's a big deal. It's a pain, everything's a pain. And then you have like 30 separate pains. And then that's what you get for society as a service. And when it works, and you just don't have to think about it, and it's great, right? So that I think was the single biggest thing, is I realized that is going to be a core function of what we do forever. And we just have to get pretty good at it, just like Coinbase had to get good at fiat currency.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. And you probably know we've been thinking about real estate for a little bit. Also, it seems that Vitalik with Zuzalu is thinking more and more about permanent Zuzalu hubs, and that's what we're attempting to build here with Zuitzerland. Thinking about real estate, I think one of the key conclusions and something we discussed in the Twitter space recently with Vitalik was, how do we fund these things? How do we fund these things in a way that they're meaningful and sustainable? And I wonder if you have had any thoughts on that beyond the traditional kind of LLC.
Yeah, great question. And ultimately, it should be community funded, where like in a deep sense, like Estonians can afford Estonia. Or, if they can't, then they, like basically in a sense, all of the territory that's in a country, all the real estate that's in a country was sort of crowdfunded by the people of that country, right? And so if you can, so that's where we want to get to. We want to get to community funding of community infrastructure, and crypto allows that, where you can apply to join a community, you can be accepted to join the community, then you put in capital and labor, and you build the thing in the physical world, right? That's ultimately where we want to get to. So, which is different than venture capital. And the biggest difference is, there's a lot of differences, but the single biggest difference is you're building it to use, right? So you don't need 1,000x investment return. I mean, by the way, some of these might be extremely profitable investments, don't get me wrong, like the Oneida commune and so on, like which built Oneida in upstate New York. Many of the startup societies of the 1800s and even 1700s were actually very profitable. So this doesn't say that it wouldn't be profitable. It could be extremely profitable. But it does mean that if you have community funding, if you break even or even lose money, you're basically buying something that you're building something you couldn't buy, right? And you're investing in something that you're actually using. You're building the community that you want, right? So eventually we want to get there. But in order to get there, we needed to have legalized a lot of crypto stuff, which we're just doing over the last few months, honestly, right? And in many ways, the old order is being cleared aside for the internet first order. That's like if you squint and you see like all the old regulations that were blocking capital formation online, that were criminalizing crypto, criminalizing privacy, et cetera. If you can have freedom of association online, the reboot is from the internet, right? You form these cloud societies and then you crowdfund physical territory. In between now and then, I think we'll probably have to have things like, me or Vitalik or somebody like us who's just basically funding it out of the back pocket until the business model is proven. That's what I think, right? Because, for example, everybody here is like, this auditorium, as Veronica, didn't happen by accident. You had to go and lease this and negotiate this and get all this stuff and so on and so forth. And that's work and that's effort and that costs money and so on and so forth, right? And so I think at the beginning, it's way easier if you can just do it out of pocket and then figure out the business model. And I think that's what it's going to be. So it might be out of pocket, then VC, then community.
Yeah, great, amazing. How familiar are you with Switzerland and its form of governance? Yeah, the cantons and things like that.
I know a little bit about it. I know the cantons have some degree of autonomy to set their own policies and even tax policies, and some of them are so small that it's like a few dozen people or something like that, right? But enlighten me. What should I know?
No, I'm just curious if it's a meaningful question to sort of ask about Europe and the challenges and opportunities right now and where Switzerland might sit within that in terms of accelerating innovation. If you have any views.
Well, I think Europe actually. So, Europe is interesting because, so I'm going to say a bunch of things that hopefully, or maybe it'll be controversial. One thing that people don't get is that since 1945, much of the world has actually been de facto U.S. colonies, like Japan, Germany. These have military bases there. Canada's a U.S. colony. These guys couldn't jump without the U.S. saying how high, right? And so, like literally to the point of, you have military troops on soil, and you have the U.S. government basically setting policies, and it's a very different relationship, but than these countries have with the U.S. And now, what just happened is the new administration has pushed that in their faces to such an extent. Like, for example, we're going to invade Greenland, says the U.S., but they already have a military base in Greenland, and they actually had already invaded Greenland in a sense. They'd already occupied it, right? All the U.S. had to do was like a 10-year visa deal, which it didn't have to be like front page. Nobody had to argue about it. If they just proposed something like the Danish-American Friendship Treaty, if you Google that, and just said, every American without a criminal record can get a 10-year multi-entry visa into Greenland to do whatever they want, including mining. Both parties would have gone for that. That would have been no problem. You could have had the invasion of Greenland with, millions, whatever number of Americans, if they actually wanted to go there, right? So all of that was just really stupid stuff, that invading Greenland, threatening Canada, talking about, withdrawing from the EU or withdrawing from NATO, all of that stuff, which is leading to the fake sovereignty becoming real sovereignty, right? So it's this funny thing where by saying, EU, you need to pay for yourself, you need to go your own way, you're ripping us off, and so on and so forth. It's a genuine misunderstanding of what the actual relationship was, where these were basically colonies of the US, and now they're being rudely loose. But that actually is a huge opportunity for people in Canada, for Europe, and so on, to carve your own way, right? Never before have you had so much autonomy within Europe, or not never before, since basically the US and USSR dominated Europe for for generations, right? Like when Macron talks about strategic autonomy, or Orban, right? Macron and Orban, very different people, but they're like sort of Europe waking up and becoming countries again. Because Europe used to be certainly its own actors with its own views. They weren't all integrated. Now, there's many ways this can take. I think There's a very high variance in terms of outcomes. I'm more bullish probably on much more bullish on Eastern Europe and the Visegrad countries than I am on Western Europe in general. But I do think that for entrepreneur, for the crypto person, for the cloud first, internet first person, that you might be able to do a lot to shape Europe if you can operate within the bounds of public opinion. Like I think technocratic kind of stuff, in many ways, actually, Europe arguably might be better off at a better demographics than America does. They have less political polarization. They have more public infrastructure. A lot of things are not as far gone in America, in Europe as they are in America. America just has the internet and finance, but that's actually very agile, mobile. And so if they lose the dollar and they lose tech, which are both likely to happen in my view, because the tariffs are doing is they're hitting the dollar as an export, they're hitting the dollar as a reserve currency very hard. And the retaliation on the US tariffs is going to mean asymmetric retaliation where US tech companies are being pushed out of global markets. Like Europe has already been annoyed to have Google there. Indonesia's wanted Apple to pay $1 billion to be there. So both the dollar and tech get pushed back. And it's possible that there's like new things happening in Europe. It's also possible that Europe just becomes a Chinese colony because EU wants to do a deal with China and they just default into that. And maybe, I don't know, that's also another future. And China then maintains a peace between Europe and Russia or what have you, because it's got leverage on both sides. There's lots of different futures for Europe, but I think Europe has opportunity in a way that it didn't have before, because in a sense, people have gone so far left, they're right. That is to say, they've gone so far left in terms of being anti-Trump or whatever, that they've gone blinking into a new area of, okay, we're not Trump, what are we? And there's 50 different directions that you can do with that, right? So that's how I think about that.
Very interesting, yeah. So our hypothesis with Zuitzerland is that we can become kind of an exit node for European founders that need a greater degree of freedom and autonomy as entrepreneurs. And you can sort of, to some degree, see that playing out with the AI hub in Zurich and Web3 in Zug. Wondering if you have any ideas on that hypothesis and how we might go about building this in a way that it doesn't just become a summer camp, but becomes something really valuable.
Right, great question. So the first is on Switzerland itself. Obviously, beautiful country, amazing chocolates, amazing people, amazing all this stuff. So great place. However, financially, Switzerland, as you're probably aware, isn't what it was. Obama in the early 2010s kicked in the doors of Swiss bank accounts and with FATCA and stuff like that. Then Switzerland was involved in the Russia sanctions, so lots of overseas capital no longer goes to Switzerland. And then the Credit Suisse debacle, they wiped out a lot of the bondholders. And so because of that, it's something where it's much less of a financial center than it was for global capital, right? With that said, it's still got a lot of things going for it. If you put a gun to my head and said, do something in Europe, I would probably do it in the Visegrad countries. I think Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, and maybe the Baltics also, especially Estonia. I think those are probably the best places to do something in Europe because they still have the memory of communism, but also Russia's next door. So they have, I think, the right balance between, internationalism and nationalism, capitalism and public goods and so on and so forth. I'm not saying they're perfect, but if I was to do something, I'd do it there. Hey, and then what was your second part of your question, Veronica?
Actually, sorry.
Was that Isla? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm very curious though. It doesn't suit my narrative, but why? What do you think that Eastern Europe has that Switzerland doesn't?
It's on the rising arc of its civilization.
Okay, tell me more.
And what I mean by that is so lots of countries in the 20th century were under communism, socialism. So that's India, China, Russia, Eastern Europe, Vietnam, and so on and so forth. And as a consequence, developed antibodies against that. And actually, broadly speaking, the countries that have rising economies are those that had a terrible 20th century, right? And the opposite is happening where the Western European countries, Japan, and especially America, Canada, that had so much wealth in the 20th century that led to infighting, basically cultural breakdown, and they're going this way. And it's kind of like imagine a kid who inherits their grandfather's or great-grandfather's factory, and they're wealthy, but they're dissipate. They don't understand how to operate that factory. They've inherited something they can never build. And they can just spend the checks and they put them up their nose. They're just doing drugs or whatever, right? There's a saying called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which say the first guy builds a wealth, the second guy maintains it, and the third, generation just spends it into oblivion. They're trust fund kids, and they are ruined by the fact that they didn't have to work for the money, right? And this is something that's very common when people just have large inheritances and so on. Where does their drive come from? Their ambition come from? They have no scarcity, right? And so at a broad level, I think that's what's happened to the West in America. That's one of several dimensions. Whereas if you start at 0, you can get to infinity, right? China started 0, like Russia had to reboot at 0, India had to reboot, Eastern Europe had to reboot, and Vietnam had to reboot. And in many ways, they have an energy that's upward. They're in the upward arc of their civilization. Let me pause there.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you. Another question we have here in Meerkat is how network school differentiates from Zuzalu and how those might be similar or different in your mind.
I only heard part of that. You said how network school is blank with Zuzalu?
So, yeah, no. A question we have in the Meerkat is how Zuzalu is different from network school and how they're either similar or different, but primarily the difference is interesting.
Oh, there's tons of differences. I mean, first of all, the location is obviously different, and that will impact the kinds of people who can come. You guys are going to have more Europeans, and we're going to have, so Zuzalu or Zuitzerland? There are 2, okay.
Zuzalu, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well,
so first of all, Zuzalu,
both,
to my knowledge.
The question specifically was Zuzalu.
Okay, great. So many communities will take on the qualities of their founder, right? And the purpose of network school for me, I mean, Vitalik and I think it's fair to say we've been friends for a long time. And I think we're both internationalists and capitalists and pro-peace and pro-trade and so on. But very, very, very roughly, he's like, the center left of the space, and I'm the center right, very roughly, right? And it's good to have, I'd say, I think I'm significantly to the left of MAGA and to the right of woke, and so is he or whatever, but, central left, okay, fine. So the way I think about that is, how does that manifest in practice? So Vitalik is, or I think Zuzalu is, as a consequence, it has a lot of good things going for it, but it tried at the beginning to implement leaderlessness in the physical world, right? And I think that whole concept is something which, led to all the sons of Zeus, Zuitzerland and Zuitzerland and this, that, and the other, right? Because the only thing worse than having a leader is having no leaders, which means you have N leaders, which you have fragmentation and fractionalization and so on and so forth. And that's fine. So basically, you get a new equilibrium once you've got leaders within each community, but somebody has to make the decisions in terms of capital allocation in the physical world. We have not yet blockchainified that, right? Like a blockchain can resolve disputes digitally without human intervention. You just set up the laws of code. But I don't think in the physical world, everything can be voted on every moment or every time. Or at least, here's the thing though, you can try that. You can try this as an experiment, and perhaps that will work. And maybe someone will get that to work. The alternative is you actually have something where there's like dispute resolution in a community. Now, I don't actually, by actually saying there's a mechanism for dispute resolution, you have fewer disputes. Because people actually understand, okay, there's a no for this and there's a yes for this. And capital allocation is coming from a purse, and that purse will say yes to these things and no to these things, and you can propose something and not. And it's just something where there's just less politics and there's more working towards building something. So I think that's like one high level maybe difference, right? Now with that said, I'm probably the largest funder of startup societies in the world. I fund all kinds of leaders around the world, right? I want to build people up and so on and so forth. But I fund 100 startups, 1,000 startups, and 100 startup societies. But I do believe in leadership. I do believe in presidents. I believe in CEOs. I believe in accountability and so on and so forth. The crucial thing is, and this is very important, there's a big difference between a president or a CEO that you've chosen to follow and somebody who's coerced in any way. Many people cannot understand the difference, but a leader lets you leave, right? Legitimate authority is one where you've signed the social smart contract. And we're going to actually make that literal in the concept of digital democracy. You cannot enter a startup society unless you've inked a social smart contract with your name and your .eth or .sol that says you've acceded to these guidelines. And that vote, you get an I voted sticker, it's on chain. And so now you've actually signed essentially a terms of service, a binding terms of service. Then you set foot into that startup society and you're bound in that way, right? So that I think is how we can kind of merge the social contract, the smart contract kinds of things together. That's stuff that I'm working on. Okay, so one high level difference is I think how we think about importance of leadership, and then just general, things. It's actually funny. Vitak also said something else, which is we actually agree on solutions, but not on problems, which is the reverse of how people normally operate, right? Normally people agree on the problem and then they disagree on the solution. We have some difference opinion on what the problem is, but we agree on the solution, which is freedom of association and encryption and travel and, voluntarism and so on and so forth, right? And that's fine. I think we agree on enough things that works out. I don't know. There's more I can say, but those are some high level things. With that said, it's kind of like Virginia and Massachusetts, right? I don't think I need to stress the differences because the similarities are so much bigger than the differences, right? The similarities are we're all interested in building, I think, communities together. We believe in a balance of public goods and individual initiative. We believe in internationalism and people from around the world working together as opposite to all the fighting and anger that's going on, right? So there's enough similarities that this community will work together. And I think this is what comes after cryptocurrency. It's crypto community.
Thank you for that. One question that we have, and I think that the reason that it's potentially relevant to people is whether you've raised outside capital for NS, for the network school. And I think the reason it's relevant is the reason for that choice to or not to raise capital. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the answer is no. I'm just doing it out of my back pocket right now. But we may do that at some point. And I think I'm definitely not averse to business. I've built very large businesses before, but I'm also not averse to doing things in a nonprofit way. I founded Coin Center, which is I think one of the most important nonprofits in policy. And I spent 10 years in academia. I've got 5,000 citations, blah, blah, blah. So I know the academic and nonprofit world, so I'm not averse to that when that's the right tool for the job. So I don't know, stay tuned on that. I think you basically need to have business models working and so on before you have outside funding and so on coming in. I think you can be premature about that. But yeah, so I'd say it's a few things. First is I can do it, so I did it. B is, it's experimentation is good. And C is I think you need or you then raise. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, no, that's really perfect. Segue into the next question, which is one thing that we're definitely considering is whether to buy or lease or how to kind of develop over the mid and long term. As I understand it, you're leasing the location of the network school. Do you have any thoughts on when might be the right time to become permanent? Is it a problem that the value that you're creating in a certain location, say the network effects that they might accrue to a specific location versus to the community itself, and whether you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question. And the answer is going to be very situational and very dependent on your local real estate partners and what have you. And usually you're not going to get everything you want, right? Meaning if you get something which has every amenity, then it's going to be expensive. And if you get something that has some flaws, then it's going to be cheaper, right? So you'll have a checklist of things, and different communities, which physical location they see themselves in will affect a lot of their development. Obviously Massachusetts Bay Colony in Virginia, different crops grew in the environments they were in. Onto your specific question, and that just shaped everything downstream of how they were, right? So that initial physical location does matter. Onto your specific question, I think it is absolutely true that if you bring a cloud community in, that will boost the value of the real estate over time, right? On the other hand, I think the space is immature enough that buying huge swaths of real estate is very capital intensive. And so at the inception of the space, I'm not sure if it makes sense to go with a big real estate spend, like in the sense of buying huge swaths of land or what have you. But once you've proven it, maybe you can. Or if you have the capital just sitting in your back pocket from crypto, you can, right? That is, I think, something that distinguishes network state and how I think about things from historically. Lots of the things that were trying to start new countries or what have you had a very big initial threshold activation function or capital raise. For example, charter cities, they have to get a deal from a government. Or seasteading, you have to build this giant floating hull, right? Or anything which is like build a city first and then have people come, right? Is a great way to lose your shirt economically, you know? And if you instead can figure out the opposite and you start with the cloud and you start with the MVP and you go upward, that I think is much more economically feasible, and often angle of attack really, really matters, right? How to turn it into an incremental problem that you go from. So TLDR is, I think, buying huge swaths of real estate is premature at this point, even if your cloud community increases value. But you can decide to do it. It depends. It's a very situational kind of thing. If you get a good price or something, maybe do it.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I say we're slightly over the hour. How much more time do you have, or do you need to cut?
I have another 26 minutes.
You have another 26. Wow. Okay, guys, we have so much time. That's amazing. So
Great.
Keep sending questions, please, into the Meerkat because we're starting to run low. I have many myself, but let's just go through. This person is asking, why do we need to inherently use or inherit US values, but not general human rights and connected principles?
That's a great question. So, and the answer is I think it's obviously both, right? So, well, first is a lot of the human rights advocacy did come out of the, like, European, like, if there's a book on this, gosh, what's it by? I'll tell you the book. I think it's Dominion, right, by Tom Holland, which traces much human rights advocacy to Christianity and the rights of man and so on and so forth, right? So you can draw a straight line from, Christianity and Christendom and the European conception of Christendom. Then the next step was the West, which was both the secularization, it was turning it into a geography, it was America plus Europe, it was a change in technology, it was a change in the center of mass to America, right, arguably. And then I think the version 3 is the internet. And so, so the answer is it is both. It's all of the above. And for example, the internet, if you go from Europe or Britain to America, you go from just individual Europeans to like all Europeans and then other ethnic groups. Then you go to the internet, and now you have something which is very much more Asian, Indian, global, and it's got people from all over, even more global than America is, and America is even more global than what Europe was. Or if you think about it, the internet is even more capitalist than America is, and America is even more capitalist than Europe is. So it's both more internationalist and more capitalist, far to the left in a sense, far to the progressive left, and also far to the libertarian right in that sense, right? Socially liberal and fiscally conservative, lol, okay? So the answer is both. That's what I think about it.
Okay. I'm just going through these questions. All right. So one question someone's asking is, why is Switzerland interesting to you, if at all? And maybe extending on that, I would be very curious, your kind of thesis around network states is on exiting the nation state?
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the thing, okay? Go and really, 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 really look at Switzerland's finances. It's probably better off than much of Western Europe, but it's just not what it was. So what's interesting to me is, when the Soviet Union fell, when the USSR fell, those people who saw it coming and were far away and had hard currency and had local contacts could buy up huge swaths of territory for a song, right? These are people who, lots of people in the Soviet Union or Russia, they're like so mad, oh my God, the oligarchs, blah, 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 right? And, but they actually took a lot of risk. To say, imagine it's like 1992, 1993, and someone's like, okay, you want like a coal factory in Russia? It's like no one knew at the time that it wasn't going to go back to communism or what have you, right? So these guys are putting $5 million into some coal factory in Siberia, and they have to land their people there, and they have to turn it around, and they have to secure it and all this stuff. And those guys who could pull that off became very wealthy, right? So there was opportunity in the quote fire sale of Russian assets, but there's also enormous risk. It was definitely not like an easy thing to turn around like a post-Soviet factory. There weren't property rights. There was obviously violence, and depending on the territories, you had enormous uncertainty. A lot of people lost their shirts, right? So I think we are going to see just a huge, huge, huge generational correction that has been kicked off by these tariffs, but especially focused on America. But I think Western Europe, the more dependent your country is on holding US bonds, US markets, US trade, US travel, US tourism in both directions and so on, I think the harder you're going to get hit. It's like the opposite of the 20th century, where the more dependent you were on the US, the better off you were. I think it's the opposite now, history running in reverse. So Switzerland is interesting to me insofar as it's still a beautiful country and there's still a lot that works there. But it is something which might have radical change in the not too distant future, more radical than people think. And if you are well positioned for that and you're a crypto person or what have you, maybe you'll see that coming, right? And maybe you can, for example, start with a canton where you can figure out how to turn around financially or what have you. The tricky part is the timing of it, because what you don't want to do is you don't have your money in a Swiss bank account when they do what happened with Credit Suisse, right? That's kind of my view on that, right? But TLDR is Switzerland is a turnaround opportunity that isn't what it was, but it could become maybe really interesting. However, most people aren't even conceptualizing it as such. They don't think of it as being poised on the edge of a precipice. Or maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I think this is really something very interesting to explore, exactly because it's not what most people would be thinking. And I think most Swiss people would think, what is this guy talking about? And certainly I probably think that too. I mean, having lived here for 10 years, but I'm really curious to understand
what did you think about the Credit Suisse episode?
What did I think about it? I mean, I used to work for UBS, so none of it surprised me too much. I guess I shouldn't say that, but no, I don't want to, I probably shouldn't comment actually. I think Switzerland has an incredible amount of technical talent. It has a great degree of infrastructure. It has high economic freedom, but it also invests in its human capital. It has really good social insurances. One thing I talked about as being highly defensive the other day is that you have like an income insurance when you lose your job.
Yes,
so
that's
instead of like your human capital kind of stopping spending money and having like an economic downturn because no one's spending any money, you kind of have this buffer. And Switzerland, I think, has just an incredible social technology that's been developed over several centuries that makes it very interesting in terms of learning from it and building on it. I want to explore where those differences in views are, though, and I'm really curious when you think about this potential change coming for Switzerland, how you imagine that happening and what that might look like.
Well, here's the thing. Look, I'm obviously a well-wisher of Switzerland, and to be clear, you're going to have way more local knowledge. So I don't feel confident enough on Switzerland to basically say I'll invest X or invest Y. Like it's one of those things where the certain areas of the world I feel I know pretty well. I think I know India reasonably well, and so on and so forth. But what my macro on Switzerland is basically just that it was this landlocked country that managed to remain neutral even during World War II and so on. It's armed to the teeth and so on. There's a lot of awesome things about Switzerland. But recently, it has gotten pulled into kind of the overall EU. It's like, it's not that different from the rest of the EU anymore, right? Or at least I feel like, for example, the fact that I participated in the Russia sanctions, or that the Credit Suisse thing happened, or that it had to bend to Obama on FATCA. Those are like three big things in the heads of certainly foreign investors. That means Switzerland is not because Switzerland was what Bitcoin is, right? Like Switzerland was like the neutral hub that was, just immune to everything. That was its entire value proposition for a long time. Now, Bitcoin and crypto have kind of taken over that value of like total neutrality, and Switzerland has, to a greater degree, in my view, assimilated to European EU values. And you'd have to look at the exact financials of everything. It might be in the best shape of Western European countries, but that's just something I would poke at. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, is there anything, I mean, if there's something that we can achieve with Zuitzerland, potentially it's also improving some of the things that we don't think are going as well in Europe or in Switzerland as they could be. And so is there anything specific, like a normative comment that you would have of like what you would specifically change, or is
No,
that
I mean,
too
that's something for you guys in Switzerland to figure out. To be clear, I mean, I'm wishing you well, and I don't know everything. All I'm saying is, actually, you know what? If you do want to change something, I would just say rebuild Switzerland's reputation for neutrality with crypto.
Okay.
That's a positive thing you could do, where foreign capital would like look at that and reboot Switzerland on, because obviously, you know, Ethereum, Zug happened there and so on and so forth, right? But like make it something where the banking is crypto first, right? So they can't freeze or seize your account. They can't stop it. Like that would be something which would rebuild Switzerland into the crypto first kind of country, right? So if there's one initiative I would take, I might do that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I think it's also interesting in terms of AI, and I'm definitely very interested to see where things are moving with AI.
But there's a guy in the front in the black shirt who's wringing his hands, and I just want to hear what he
Yeah,
has to say.
yeah, you know him. You know him, Ashley. So.
Hello, Balaji. Do you remember me?
Oh, you've got an NS shirt.
Yeah, I'm Burns. We met
Okay.
in Vitalia.
Okay, great.
I want to ask I was very surprised that you told us here on stage, if you want to do something in Europe, you would go to the Visegrad states or Estonia because it's easier there, and Switzerland will more and more have to have compliance with the European Union. And this is something, and you also say that you are not super versed in the Swiss law and how it exactly looks like. I want to comment this. In
Go
the
ahead. Yeah, what did I
European
get wrong? Did I
Union,
get something wrong? Don't tell me.
we are running into a surveillance state. There will very likely not be any anonymous Web3 wallets anymore in 3 years in the European Union. Switzerland is not affected by this. You talk about the internet first era, and the internet might encompass Web3, but there is a qualitative difference, and Estonia might be the right country to make an internet first base. Switzerland is the right country to make a Web3 and a crypto first base. Because Switzerland in its self-understanding is exactly that in its political system and also in its neutral standing with the other countries despite having trade. So I'm really surprised that you would see the potential of Europe for Web3, not for the internet as a whole, not purely in Switzerland. And I would want to ask you, what's your stance on that?
Yeah. So first of all, one of the things you're saying is interesting because, you know, it actually gets me more interested because the differences between European countries are going to become more important. Like, for example, Switzerland is in Europe, but not part of the EU. So it's not under that specific regulation for like banning crypto wallets, right? And all of those sort of edge cases may be helpful, right? Because there's like the EU and there's like the Schengen zone and there's like the Eurozone, and these things like kind of overlap, and like Norway's outside it and what have you. All of those kinds of edge cases that as Europeans, you guys are hyper aware of may actually turn out to be very important because they don't get hit by some bad regulation. And so they've got a relative advantage there. And certain kinds of businesses might be best, as you say, for different locations, right? Like, you know, Sweden and Northern Europe had this whole pirate party thing a long time ago. And I wonder if there's some of that still in their DNA, you know, in the sense of encryption and open source and all that kind of stuff. So they might also be an interesting place. But so I guess the short answer is, as a European, you're going to be versed on the, you know, it's like dozens of European countries. You make a table of rows and you make a table of columns and the pros and cons. And the interesting thing is the post-American Europe, which is what Europe is becoming, is a more interesting place from a jurisdictional standpoint because it's all not homogenized out by kind of US influence. So that I think is kind of interesting. Anyway, so I think you try and figure out what you can do uniquely in Switzerland. And I think when people abroad think of Switzerland, they think beautiful country, chocolates, it used to be a great banking center, and it's less so today because of this stuff. Go ahead.
Great. So I'm going to take away from that. Switzerland needs better marketing, which probably as an Anglo-Saxon I can totally agree with.
No, it's an amazing country. Please don't take me as negative. I don't mean to. I'm just saying that the banking thing was the core strength of Switzerland for a long time, and it's taken these three massive hits, which has meant crypto and Dubai and others have taken a lot of the volume. That's what I'm just saying. So if you want to rebuild Switzerland, I'd really focus on neutrality in banking.
Great. Amazing. Thank you. Somebody asked the question, to what extent you think that network states and societies will be democratic societies? And having built one now yourself, you maybe have some even nuanced views on this.
Totally. Yeah. So I am a huge believer and funder of democracy, equality, media, science, in the sense of, for example, the way I gave a whole talk on this called Techno-Democracy, and I can link that here, in fact. But basically, one of the fundamental things is the, here, let me link this so you guys can watch this. Okay, so that goes into all the details of kind of, I would say, the next step after DAOs, right? So what do I believe in democracy? I believe in the consent of the governed, right? That's actually the root thing, right? You know, the Protestant, when Martin Luther went and, nailed the 99 Theses or 97 Theses, I forget the number, to the door of Wittenberg Church, he was going back to the root. He was basically like, Catholic Church, it's not actually even in the Bible. Let's go back to the Bible. Let's go back to the root, right? So that's what a radical is. It goes back to the root. So you go back to the root of what democracy is, and it's the consent of the governed, right? That's actually, all the structure above it is like a machinery that's like the Catholic Church for like putting in votes and measuring things and so on, right? So the first thing is the consent to be governed, right? Which is, do you opt into a society or not? And then there's the governance mechanism within that society. So in my view, I think you combine voting with your feet, voting with your wallet, and voting with your ballot into one thing, which is to say, you find a startup society online, you apply to them, they determine mutually whether you're accepted, and then you sign the social smart contract and stake a certain amount of funds, and then you move there, right? That is actually something where if you have 1,000 societies to choose from, you have much more practical choice than you do in a two-party or even K-party system, right? Because you are choosing your polity as well as your governance, okay? And some people might say, oh, well, not everybody can do that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, first of all, we can reduce the barriers to exit. So we can, that's a technological thing, like plane travel, the internet, all those things reduce the barriers to exit. The second is, you don't need everybody to do it. You just need to march a small number of people. Like the US never went mainstream, only 4% of the world moved there. Actually, you don't need everybody to move somewhere. Small percentage of people moving can shift all kinds of behavior, right? So essentially a relatively small percentage of globally mobile people that move between societies can shift basically policies. And I think that's actually what democracy is going to look like. And I think, by the way, in 10 years or so, democracy is going to be blamed for the bankruptcies of the US and Western Europe and so on. Democracy will be like in as bad shape in some ways as communism was after the fall of the Soviet Union. It'll be blamed for a lot of the disasters that are, I think, about to come. And I think there'll be an overcorrection because democracy is a big word. It's like Christianity or like Christianity can mean both the slave religion that tore down the Roman Empire and the quote master religion that built the Holy Roman Empire, right? It can be both, one thing and its opposite. And so I think a true democracy, a digital democracy where people actually have substantive choice, so that's something I think about a lot. And the key thing is it's democracy between countries, not within them, right? So you actually have substantive choice of 1,000 different places to go. But when you join, you're joining in a position. And it's similar to like when you join Apple, right? You join Apple, it's completely consensual, but you're not immediately contending for like a board vote, right? You don't have context, you don't have knowledge, you don't have any information about Apple. You're joining as, at the Apple store. Maybe, however, you get an offer and you're joining as like a senior person there, right? So rather than throw everybody into a pool and have them all just contend constantly, fight for power or whatever, instead you have an offer as to where you are in the hierarchy, and you might get the equivalent of ministerial role when you come in, and then you don't feel you need to quote run for office. And then you might get a better offer somewhere else in a different startup society, right? And I think that gives you far more practical choice than the sort of uniparty fake democracy within a country that we've had, for a long time. Let me pause there.
Thank you for that. That's a very interesting perspective. I'm curious, coming back to the investment topic, having been a successful investor yourself, We talked a bit about the potential for 1000x or 100x, where you potentially see some of the opportunities for large returns with these societies, and if you have any specific ideas on what that looks
sure.
like.
Well, just the fact that, I mean, the two most, like, in a sense, profitable industries in the world are technology and real estate, right? Like those, those are things that are just throwing off huge amounts of capital in different ways. And if you can use the internet to reinvent real estate, then that's a lens. You know what that's similar to? That is similar to how like a finance guy looks at crypto, right? A finance guy looks at crypto and he looks at the bar charts, the candlestick charts and, the trend lines and so on and so forth. And they don't really think about the values under the valuations. They don't think about the ideology of, Satoshi and so on. But of course those values are why you can send and receive crypto and do smart contracts. But people can engage with it as just kind of a superficial financial level. And similarly, if you just think about the tech real estate angle on it, that is I wouldn't say low IQ, but it's a non-ideological, pragmatic lens on, can you use this to do new things in real estate? And if you can, real estate's such an important industry with so much capital going into it that will unlock a lot of capital for the next thing.
Interesting, because you were saying before, and I kind of agree with this, that
I have to wrap after this question, by the way.
yeah, sure. You were saying that, actually then we'll skip this, because this is another question that I think is interesting, and that's someone asked about how you see public goods potentially being funded in a future where network states are omnipresent.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's easier to just have the subscription state. So I wrote a whole post on this right here. Here we go. So basically, the subscription state, it's literally society as a service, right? And so here, I'll put this on screen. So you can Google Balaji, this is the subscription state. And it is what it sounds like. It's basically, you pay a flat fee of X dollars per month, or X Bitcoin per month, right? X millibitcoin per month, whatever, okay? And that's it. That's your tax, right? Like Dropbox, for example, if you think about it, this is a very important point. Dropbox, Google, right? These companies manage to collect billions of dollars from people all around the world just through the internet. They have no tax collectors, they have no auditors, right? What they just do is, if you don't pay, they just shut off your service, right? Nobody goes to jail. No, it's just something where if you're behind, they shut off the service, they hit a button, and then you pay and you get back in good service and you get back in, right? That is actually the key concept. That is a completely new model for what tax collection is. And it's as scalable because Google, Facebook, they make more money than most countries, right? Most countries are small countries, and most countries are not booking 90 billion a year in revenue, right? What that means is the future is actually in front of us, where you basically have people who do the subscription state. They have society as a service, and prices cannot be raised on them without their consent. They can just move to another society. If they feel their value for service is not high enough, it is the citizen as consumer, right? Now, of course, just like, patriotism is also important, right? But I think you can overcorrect and undercorrect on different kinds of things, right? And and not everything obviously can be priced or what have you, but I think that the Western state has radically overcorrected in its level of nationalism and socialism in terms of its really terrible finances and ultranationalism. And going the other direction is actually going to be important as a corrective on that. And then you could go too far and then you have to come back, right? So that's the short answer, is you fund public goods with the subscription state, and that just pools the capital. And then, just like with Dropbox, the CEO of Dropbox determines which features to add, right? The Dropbox government determines which features. Not everything is voted. Some of the stuff, obviously, customers have feedback. They say, I'm canceling my subscription because you don't have this, that, and the other feature. Of course, that's possible. A large customer can request a certain feature and then you build it. That's all reasonable, right? But that model is something which already exists, and that's how I think we can build public goods in the future. And you have to decide, by the way, when you're building a company, this feature is going to benefit everybody, is going to benefit many of the users, is going to benefit a small number, is going to benefit a very high dollar number user that then cross-subsidize others. Those kinds of decisions are made by CEOs and businesses all the time. They don't always make the right decisions. It's hard to make the right decisions, but at least there's a mechanism for doing so. And I think that's what public goods are going to look like.
That's super interesting. And
All right, I gotta go, guys.
Thank you very much,
Talk soon.
Balaji. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.